I can't tell you how happy I am to be here because when I started on the journey of trying to trace down survivals of line singing, I didn't have a documentary in mind, but I did have in mind bringing to my campus and my alma mater uh, a group of people who could talk about the subject and find out things about the tradition that we enjoy as common elements of our separate cultures. A lot about this journey is local to here, and especially local to where I am from. I am from Sheffield, Alabama, born and raised in northwest Alabama. Today, when I drive out of my driveway, I go right on a highway that is marked as the Trail of Tears, right in front of my house. I drive down the road a little piece, about a half mile, and that road turns into the W.C. Handy Highway. W.C. Handy, you will remember, was the composer of St. Louis Blues. People think that it was written here. It was not. And it was not written in Sheffield, Alabama either. Handy says that he came to my school when I was in the second grade in Sheffield. And the reason he came to my school is that he had been a minstrel show orchestra conductor. He said he had 43 of the best musicians in the world, in America, in his orchestra in the 1890s, and they traveled the width and breadth of the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Cuba. And he said that he was nourished by those experiences because he said, we all have one impression of the minstrel tradition. He says, but before every show in whatever town we traveled to by train, he said we would stand in front of the theater where we were going to play, or the big circus-style tents, and play 1 full hour of concert classical music, and then go in and do the minstrel show. And said standing outside playing for the audiences, getting them interested in coming inside, was called ballyhoo. Ballyhoo. They strut down the street and draw a crowd that way. And Handy finally left the minstrel show and taught. Came from a minstrel show performer to a professor at Alabama A&M University, which had an industrial training school before Booker Washington established Tuskegee. And in his class, one of his classes, was a young man, trumpet player, who turned out to be the husband of my 4th grade teacher, and he was our town dentist in Sheffield. So whenever Mr. Handy came home, as he did this time, he stayed at the home of his former student, Dr. Coker. And part of the deal was he would be given bed and breakfast in exchange for coming to the school to tell the children about their heritage. And there I was, 2nd grade, listening at the father of the blues, the composer of St. Louis Blues, talk about the musical heritage that is so central to who we were in this small segregated school there in Sheffield. And he had us sing with him. He brought along his trumpet, and we sang spirituals, and he played the trumpet along with us. And he says, using reverse psychology on children, old people are funny, strange about that. What they do to little children shouldn't be allowed. What he said, I bet you children don't know how to sing. And we leapt up and said, oh yeah, we know how to sing. Let's sing something. He said, well, what do you want to sing? He said, I bet you don't know Go Down Moses. We said, You want to try us? And we sang Go Down Moses and a few of the other Old Testament songs, the ones that we preferred because those were the ones, like the Psalms of David, that had the suction. They stuck around, they stuck with it there. And at the end of his visit with us, all of the children who were identified as musically inclined were permitted to line up and shake the hand that wrote St. Louis Blues. It's a wonder I didn't have a heart attack. 5 years old, it almost killed me because I'd been singing St. Louis Blues on the street corners and grocery stores of Sheffield since I was 3 years old. And, if I got an extra piece of candy, I'd do a step or two. So Mr. Handy came through there and changed my life, but I forgive him. One of the things that we didn't need Mr. Handy to tell us about was hearing the people line out the hymns in church. We knew that was magic. Even at 4 and 5 years old, that would make the hair stand up on the back of my neck at any rate. And then I watched gradually this thing disappear, or at least I thought it had disappeared. I had not been able to hear it or find it anywhere. Even in the great migrations of blacks from the American South into New England and other parts of the country, for a while it persisted, and then it gradually died out. No matter how far and wide I would search, I couldn't hear anybody lining out anymore. And then I happened to stumble onto a few examples, and I found them, and they led me to several places, which you'll see in the documentary. But I want to make special mention now of the fact that once I had found all of these disparate strings, it was like pulling on a yellow cord sticking out from under a haystack, and finally it led me to the golden egg. And I had contacted enough congregations to have a conference at Yale in 1905. And it cost Yale a lot of money. I got very excited about it because just the act of paying everybody's expense from Scotland and ended up from Kentucky and southern part of Alabama, putting them up for 3 days and feeding them. Those Baptists and Presbyterians can eat. Was a sizable consideration there. And but I had no idea. I hadn't thought that far enough ahead to try to raise the money to make a documentary. A documentary was nowhere in mind. And then, out of the blue, the director of the Yale University Art Gallery said, there is a young doctor here that you have got to meet. She has just won a MacArthur grant. She went to medical school at Washington University here in St. Louis. Before she went to medical school, she had been a science producer for Nova, PBS. So she worked with some of the best crews in television. And Gretchen Berlind is her name. She's an internist now at Yale Medical School. And she won the MacArthur Award or grant on the basis of a film that she made about doctoring and taking care of people in wheelchairs. She gave about a dozen patients in wheelchairs that she was taking care of cameras and said, I want you to film every aspect of your life at home. I don't care how uncomfortable it makes you. Take this camera into the bathroom. Take it everywhere you go. And she put together this film to teach doctors in medical school some facts about what it was like to live in wheelchairs without, because they didn't have any exposure to this. And on the basis of that, she won a MacArthur grant. When she heard what I had in mind about this conference, she came to me and said, I've got a bone to pick with you. Oh, incidentally, she's an amateur French horn player, and so am I. And she said, I have a proposition for you. And I said, well, what's that? And she said, you've got a good idea, and I think it's very positive here. I am going to bring the crew that shot with me for Nova to film this conference, and I'm going to pay for it out of my MacArthur grant. I've never heard of that before. Anybody here ever hear of anything like that? That's called secular tithing. If you have ever heard of a MacArthur awardee giving away 10%, because that's what it cost her, 10% of her MacArthur is the result of. So you will understand why early in the documentary there is a statement there that this documentary is dedicated to Dr. Gretchen Berlin. She's a piece of work. She wanted to be here with us this morning and asked me to send her regards. She went with, after we did the first conference, I went back to Yale. They hated to see me coming, and said, look, I've learned that there's a Muskogee Creek component to this, and we need to go out there with this crew and shoot that. And I don't want Gretchen to give another 10%. I want the university to do it, you know. And they said, boy, you sure talk a hard bargain. And so we did it there, and I hope you will learn something and enjoy a conjoining of ancient song. Thank you.
So I would like to have Willie please talk a little bit about the Black Presbyterians that you discovered. Would you please? And they're lining out.
I'll just say a few words about the church where I rediscovered this in Killen, Alabama, which is near where I live. I was moved to go back to that part of, it's about 20 miles from my home in Sheffield, and I went and bought land that I used to plow with a mule when I was 10 years old. Nice land. I let the mule go, but I made a home there. And it was there that I was told about this Black Presbyterian church, and that's a rarity, I have to tell you. There are not very many of those left. And this church, it was a very special occasion when they told me that they were having this kind of a festival and catfish dinner. And the reason that the lining out was done at that event is that there were so many of the elder parts of the congregation, not just from that church, but from the whole area. There are probably 8 or 9 Black Presbyterian congregations in that part of North Alabama, and they'd all come together for what they called the presbytery at that time, which only happens a few times a year, 2 or 3 times. And somebody just spontaneously, there was enough of a critical mass for them to be able to line out the hymns. I went back after that, and there was no more lining. So it is endangered unless there is a critical mass of people old enough to have been raised in the tradition, because it's not written down anywhere. It has to be there. And let me say one other thing that's notable about the Black congregation from southern Alabama, from Utah. When I said in the documentary that anybody can moan, you will notice that in the American tradition there were no women preachers, and the women didn't lead the hymn singing. And that's true in every instance. I saw the beginnings of a movement to get women to lead hymns, or rather the Psalms, in Scotland, but I've never seen it here in the United States. However, that moaning tradition, which is seems to be exclusive among the black primitive Baptists and Presbyterians, that moaning tradition is something that is, as I said, open to anybody, and the best of the moaners are the women. They totally undo me. I have to leave. I just can't stay in the same room with it. It's so powerful. And I find in it really the germs of everything from Charlie Parker on back, that what they do there. And it's not always just one line. Somebody else will actually add a separate tone, so it's not monophonic. And this is a kind of creativity that's somehow unique to us. And I find that endlessly fascinating. And also the way those elders pray. Now that's improvisation at its most creative. The way they could, and you saw the way old Raymond, that long prayer that Raymond had there, with all those grown men crying, and Cordette also bringing those people to tears. That was a grace. He was thanking God for a sandwich. So all of this is just packed with thundering paradoxes. How these people could get this. And I let me say one other thing about the people's preferences. Well, last night we were having a sandwich with Diane and Callum and a couple of other people, and Callum was admitting how it's only the Psalms in Gaelic that really get to him. The rest of it, And I tell people, I said, it's interesting. The Psalms that are important to the Scots in the Outer Hebrides, Psalms that are rather obscure to us, and 23rd Psalm to them is, take it or leave it. It's in other words, it doesn't. And how do you account for that? I really have no idea. But I still find myself unable to stay in a room with a bunch of really moaning Alabama women, especially, like the ones like you saw in that film. And I go among these people still occasionally, and they take great pleasure in running me out of the room. They said, let's moan Brother Ruff outdoors. So could I take any questions for you from? Yes, sir. Same microphone or the one over there? Huh?
Thank you so much. At one point in the documentary, I think 3 congregations met in the Marble Library, and there was a shared repertoire to some extent. They did it a little differently, but
Right.
Is there any melodic shared repertoire between the Gaelic singing and any of the American congregations, or has that been studied?
I don't think there has been that much attention paid to that, and it's a good field for somebody, because in that Marble Library are copies of Psalms in Gaelic, in Muskogee Creek, and in English as well. So the songs that they were singing were different melodic versions of the same text. And would have been texts that would have been shared. And some of those documents were nearly 200 years old.
But are they documented in notation?
No.
No, they're not.
No,
Okay.
none of it is documented in notation.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Is there a name for what the gray-haired lady from the Kentucky congregation was doing? Because for some of us that are just learning about this, that I would connect that with the moaning styles, and she seemed to be improvising that as well.
There is some improvising in that, but those songs that she sang about washing my mommy's feet and all, it's very much along the lines of many of the folk tunes that were prevalent during that time.
And that actually brings up the subject of how both the lining out and the Gaelic psalm singing are so related to folk traditions within the cultures that they come from, which is something that maybe we'll hear about in some of the other sessions. Are there any other questions? Oh, good.
Are the harmonies in the black churches, harmonies there more similar to, I've heard more unison singing on the white churches, so are those harmonies more similar to the Western African harmonies? Or it's just fifths and drums and things like that?
Actually, the harmonies are themselves are so unpredictable, somebody might just decide to add one tone. So it's almost hard to call it harmony as such. It's really counterpoint, point against point there, but it's I've only been able to hear them somebody add a tone among the black congregations. It's a curious thing. I've often wondered about that, and you only hear that added tone among the blacks. These very special characteristics and I'm sure there must be some, maybe Hugh will speak to that later, some special characteristic that is there more prevalent with the Muskogee Creek singing than with say Gaelic psalm singing.